You are standing in a narrow court behind a beerhouse. The dawn a weak brews over Whitechapel. The smell hits first, hot metal and the spill of entrails, then the rasp of a constable's breath as his lantern throws a slice of light across a throat cut to the spine. Somewhere a milk cart rattles. Indifferent, a woman's boots lie apart like abandoned punctuation. You taste coal smoke and bile. In the stillness, you hear it. The small city noises that keep living while a body cools. Fingers stiffen, steam feathers from the cobbles, and a whisper of prayer rises from someone who cannot look away. Your stomach wants to turn, but your feet won't move. This is not a nightmare. It is a street. It is a morning. It is a woman with a name. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness. If you value careful, unsensational history told slowly, so you can see, smell, and think, subscribe and like now. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Your city and your hour become part of this vigil. Drop a comment if you hear a detail you've never heard before. Or if you catch an error. We remember the victims best when more eyes and ears are present. Share this with someone who thinks the case is only gore or gossip, then stay for the evidence. It is London, 1888. The air over the East End tastes of soot and sweat, of horse, gin, and hunger. You walk through Whitechapel and Spitalfields as a pair of borrowed boots. A pair of eyes that cannot close. The streets are narrow canyons of brick, choked by casual violence and poverty. Lodging house doors click all night with people buying a bed by the hour. In late August, a woman is found in Bucks Row with her throat cut so deep the spine is nicked. Her name is Mary Ann Polly Nichols. In early September, Annie Chapman is discovered behind 29 Hanbury Street, mutilated. On the night of the 30th of September, the double event, Elizabeth Stride is killed in Berner Street, and less than an hour later, Catherine Eddowes is murdered in Mitre Square. In November, inside a one-room dwelling at 13 Miller's Court, Mary Jane Kelly is butchered almost beyond recognition. These 5 murders, the canonical 5, as later writers will call them, are the spine of the case. Everything you will hear tonight is drawn from inquests, police memoranda, surgeons' notes, and contemporary reports. The record speaks in voices. Surgeons with blood on their cuffs, coroners, reporters, constables whose patrol beats crisscross like netting. It speaks in Coroner Wynne Baxter's inquest rooms, and in the handwriting of Dr. Thomas Bond, a police surgeon who will try to read method from the bodies. It speaks in the decision of Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren to erase, at first light, chalked words on a wall in Golston Street near where a piece of Eddowes's bloodied apron was found, an order given. He said, to prevent an anti-Jewish riot. It speaks in the torrents of letters sent to newspapers and the police. Some signed, Jack the Ripper. Most later judged hoaxes, a few still argued about. It speaks even in a modern shawl said to have come from Mitre Square. Tested for mitochondrial DNA more than a century later, an object offered as science and met with cautions from other scientists. You are the witness who does not interrupt. You are the person an officer nods past at the edge of a cordon. The one who hears a lodging house keeper swear she saw a client at 2:30. The one who smells carbolic on a doctor's hands. You will walk the map in order and in rain. Feel the mud take your heel and the knuckles of brick scratch your shoulder. You will hear about a royal conspiracy, about Freemasons and surgeons and a prince whose name was whispered in public houses years after the murders ended. You will hear that the killer had to be a gentleman, spirited from scene to scene in a carriage, protected by power. But you will also read the daily entries of court circulars and diaries that place the prince elsewhere. You will see how one journalist's best-selling story became the seed of a legend the evidence does not support. There will be blood in these streets, and fear, and the heavy knowledge that the victims' names, Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes, Kelly, are not a legend. They were women, and they died here. We will move in order. Bucks Row to Hanbury Street, to Berner Street and Mitre Square, to Miller's Court. We will touch the letters. Follow the piece of apron to the wiped wall. and stand in the rooms where surgeons dictated what knives and hands had done. When the talk turns to palaces and secret marriages, you will hold the timeline beside those claims and watch what fails to fit. And when we end, you will be left with the same unsolved case, but with less fog. And with the women at the center where they belong. You begin in the last minutes of August, when midnight has rolled into a chill Friday. The gas lamps are weak in Whitechapel Road, and Bucks Row is darker still. A narrow east-west slice behind a board school wall. At about 3:40 a.m., you trail the footsteps of two carmen, Charles Cross and Robert Paul, who stop over what they think is a tarpaulin and find a woman lying on her back. Skirts pulled down to her knees. A constable's tread approaches. PC John Neal feels the chest and says the body is warm but cooling. In the dim, they do not see what the mortuary lamps will show: two deep cuts across the throat. And, beneath the clothing, savage injuries to the abdomen. Dr. Reese Ralph Llewellyn, called from his surgery in Whitechapel Road, will give the first clinical outline of her wounds, and a coroner will give her back her name, Mary Ann Nichols, and her life in testimony, the lodging house debts, the last coins, the quarrel over a bed. The streets remember in small ways, you remember in full. The inquest makes order from horror. You hear lodging housekeepers testify about coins and quarrels. You hear a constable describe the trajectory of his beat down Bucks Row. His sightlines, his timing. You watch as reporters stitch phrases into pages that will be read over breakfast across London. In shop doorways, people say the killer must be Leather Apron, an anti-Semitic fantasy fixed to a local bootmaker, John Pizer, who is arrested and then released when his alibi holds. The rumor travels faster than the patrols can walk. The fear travels faster still. A week later, on Saturday the 8th of September, the fog breathes in and out of Hanbury Street. You walk behind 29 Hanbury just after 5, in the narrow backyard that tenants share for their chores. A woman named Annie Chapman is on the ground, her head by the steps, her body opened. Her intestines are laid on the shoulder and over the right side of the body. The uterus has been removed. Her rings are missing, perhaps wrenched from swelling fingers. Dr. George Bagster Phillips, the divisional surgeon, judges the throat cuts fatal and the mutilations post-mortem or near it, and estimates the time of death by the body's cooling and the stiffness in the limbs. Neighbors recall voices, a murmur of no, a scuff, the scrape of boots, the sorts of sounds every yard hears. Except this time they belong to a murder. You feel the wet chill that soaks to the bone and the way breath clouds when someone tries to speak. Fear finds a mask, and the mask is skill. Doctors disagree in public, some insisting the hand is that of a man used to a knife, others cautioning that a butcher's boldness is not the same as a surgeon's discipline. The coroner's court hears of a leather apron again, of men with blood on their cuffs from honest work, of strangers leaning in doorways where strangers rarely linger. A woman remembers Chapman with a shabby genteel man and a scrap of conversation about money. Another recalls a flower-sprigged bonnet and the particular way Chapman held her shawl tight to her. You stand in the crowd and learn how quickly a city can turn skilled labor into suspicion, and a victim into rumor. Letters arrive. Some are written on cheap paper in violent red ink, many with the same jagged signature, Jack the Ripper. The "Dear Boss" letter goes to the central news agency and then into newsprint. You read the swagger and the glee at cutting the latest ears off, and you feel the heat of headlines selling faster than bread. Police file them, doubt them, sometimes print them anyway. Later, long after your breath no longer frosts the East End air, curators and historians will point out that hundreds of these letters were almost certainly hoaxes. Their ink more useful to newspaper circulation than to detectives. From Nichols to Chapman, the city learns the killer's curve. The throat is cut from left to right. The face is not the target, the abdomen is. No struggle is heard, or none that anyone can swear to. The weapon moves quickly, the killer faster. The police try decoys, try plain clothes patrols, try watching lodging houses and slaughter yards. They find men with blood under their nails and reasons for it. They bring them in anyway. They find knives with the right length and the wrong stains. They take them anyway, and somewhere beyond the lighted cones of the lanterns, a man is already mapping his next turn. In the pubs, people invent the man. He is a foreigner, they say. He is a doctor, they say. He is a madman, they say. A sailor in from the docks. A midwife slipping through streets where no one questions blood on a skirt. You listen to every certainty and hear how it ends in a question mark. In the police offices, the maps fill with pins. Beats are redrawn. Lists of slaughtermen and medical students are compiled. A senior officer writes to Dr. Thomas Bond at Scotland Yard, enclosing the inquest notes and asking for his view. Can the wounds speak to the mind that made them? Bond will answer, after the last and worst of the murders, with a cool profile built from knives and seconds and silence. Walk back with me into Hanbury's yard. The neighbors have washed the steps. There is a wet shine on the flagstones where blood ran to the drain. A woman ties her apron and tries not to look. Someone mutters about how early the cats came. A child is shooed inside. These details are not the stuff of legend. They are the static that wraps around the signal. You note the time, the weather, the angle of the sun when it finally climbs. The coroner dictates. A reporter sketches the plan of the yard. A policeman counts footfalls from door to back gate and back again, measuring whether any of it could have happened without a single shout. Before the month ends, the officers will have learned the sounds a city makes when it braces. Bad jokes get worse. Children are warned off alleys they played in yesterday. Lodging housekeepers demand to see the hands of men who ask for a bed. Some women carry their bed fee like a talisman, showing it to friends as if money could buy safety as surely as it buys sleep. You carry the victims' names instead, because names fight the erosion that follows panic. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman. You say them aloud in the cold and listen to how quickly the street swallows the sound. When you leave Hanbury Street, you know only this. The killer moves inside gaps of minutes. He chooses the edges of patrols. He carries a blade he controls and a nerve he can hold. And he can disappear into the spill of a working-class dawn as if he belongs to it. The police know it too. They do not have a face. They have a timetable. And already you can feel the next turn of the screw. The East End is a lung that never fills. And somewhere in it a man is counting streets instead of sins. Between Bucks Row and Hanbury Street, panic learned to stand. Before September is out, it will learn to run. The city will not sleep tonight, anywhere. It is the night of the 30th of September 1888. You stand beneath gaslight that trembles in a damp breeze. London's East End is wound tight. The tension of the last killings strung through every alley. Rain spits from a low ceiling of cloud. The cobbles shining like wet pewter. You are there, watching, waiting, as if the city itself is holding its breath. It will soon exhale in blood. At Berner Street, near a socialist club called the International Working Men's Educational Club, a woman lies half in the street, half inside a gateway. The yard belongs to a Jewish printing contractor named Louis Diemschitz, who turns his pony cart into the entrance just before 1 in the morning. The animal shies. He peers ahead and sees what he thinks is a tarp. When he strikes a match, the flame shakes and shows a woman's face, white, slack, with her eyes open. A black silk scarf is twisted tight around her neck, her throat cut, but her body otherwise untouched. There are no abdominal mutilations this time. The constables arrive quickly, P.C. Lamb, P.C. Smith, and later Inspector Aberline himself. The body is Elizabeth Stride, known as Long Liz, a Swedish-born prostitute who lived in a lodging house on Flower and Dean Street. She is 45, short, and missing a small piece of her left ear. Witnesses recall her last hours. Seen with a dark-haired man wearing a peaked cap. Seen again at 11 p.m. with another man holding a parcel wrapped in newspaper. A woman named Mrs. Mortimer says she heard nothing unusual, only the faint tread of boots and a pony's sudden cry. The police examine the blood. It runs toward the gutter in a slow red fan. Still wet. The cut is clean. One stroke. From left to right, a watchman nearby swears he saw a man wiping his hands on a handkerchief as he hurried away toward Commercial Road. But the East End has 100 men hurrying at that hour, and the only thing they share is hunger. You step closer, and the smell of iron fills your nose. The lanterns hiss. Stride's mouth is slightly open, as though she meant to speak. Somewhere above, a window slams shut. The killer has done less this time, too little. Perhaps, before someone disturbed him, the mutilation ritual, if such it is, feels incomplete. That thought will make sense only later, when less than an hour passes before he kills again. Blank. Underscore. Blank. You move through the dark veins of the East End toward Mitre Square. A small, wedge-shaped space hemmed in by warehouses and offices belonging to the City of London police jurisdiction. It is nearly 1:40 a.m. when P.C. Watkins, making his regular patrol, turns into the square and stops dead. His lantern throws a circle of gold around a figure sprawled against the stone wall of the passage known as Church Passage. The woman's throat is cut, twice. The face is slashed, the eyelids nicked, the nose cut nearly away. The abdomen is opened wide, the intestines arranged across the right shoulder, and the left kidney and part of the uterus are missing. Her hands are clenched, her eyes half open, the pupils clouding. She is later identified as Catherine Eddowes, 46, recently released from Bishopsgate Police Station less than an hour before for drunkenness. She had given a false name, Mary Kelly. The surgeon, Dr. Frederick Gordon Brown, examines the scene by lamplight. He notes that the mutilations were done swiftly, perhaps within 5 minutes. The killer had knowledge enough to find organs by touch. Yet the work is rough, not clinical. Brown later writes, "It must have been done by one who had been used to the postmortem room." You can see his pen shake slightly as he drafts the report. The air in Mitre Square smells of damp wool and blood and fog. The constable's boots leave dark tracks that glisten. A small crowd gathers at the edge of the cordon, silent but breathing as one organism, feeding on shock. No one knows yet that Stride and Eddowes died within minutes of each other. 2 victims. 2 jurisdictions. 1 night. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Eddowes's bloodied apron becomes the key. When police search the route a killer might have taken eastward, P.C. Long finds a torn piece of fabric in a doorway at 108 to 119 Golston Street. Nearby, scrawled in chalk on the wall, is the message: "The Jewess are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Whether it was written by the killer or not is still debated. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, orders it erased at first light, fearing it might incite anti-Semitic riots. But the erasure also erases a potential clue. The fragment of apron is preserved, and you can still see its bloodstains in modern photographs. The handwriting, the chalk, the words, these are small ghosts of the killer's passage. You picture him walking through the cold, his hands sticky and red, his blade wrapped in the very cloth torn from Eddowes's apron. Somewhere between Berner Street and Mitre Square, he had paused long enough to clean himself and keep moving. When the coroner reads the surgeon's reports, the details fall like stones. Eddowes's lobe of ear is cut, suggesting that "Dear Boss" letter's threat of ear removal might have been genuine. Yet police handwriting experts cannot link the letter to anyone. Newspapers print the "From Hell" letter soon after, a small box containing half a human kidney, pickled in spirits, mailed to George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Dr. Openshaw of the London Hospital examines it and confirms it is human and from the left side, the same side missing from Eddowes. But whether it is hers cannot be proved. The specimen disappears decades later, another artifact swallowed by time. Blank. Underscore. Blank. You walk with the detectives as they retrace every footstep. Inspector Aberline rubs his temples and mutters that the killer knows the patrol routes. Sir Melville Macnaghten writes private memoranda later, listing suspects: Montague John Druitt, a barrister, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jew and asylum inmate, Michael Ostrog, a Russian con man, None can be tied directly to the scene. Each name becomes another flicker of certainty in a case built on fog. Meanwhile, the public grows hungrier for a story that makes sense. And into that hunger slips the royal conspiracy. The rumor begins quietly, whispers that Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and grandson of Queen Victoria, had fallen in love with a Catholic shopgirl named Annie Elizabeth Crook, married her in secret, and fathered a child. The story claims that a group of Freemasons and royal physicians murdered prostitutes who knew too much to cover up the scandal. Years later, authors such as Stephen Knight in Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, 1976, will give the theory shape, tracing it through artists like Walter Sickert and the Queen's own surgeon Sir William Gull. But in the record of 1888, the prince's name appears nowhere near Whitechapel. The court circular places him at Balmoral and later at Sandringham during the killings. None of the attending physicians are missing from duty, and no carriage is reported speeding through East End alleys at midnight. The idea of a Masonic cover-up grows from the erasure of the Golston Street graffiti, from Warren's known Masonic ties, from the human wish to make the monstrous logical. You, standing in that doorway, realize how easily fear builds its own architecture. Still, the theory endures. People prefer secrets to randomness. A royal conspiracy explains why the case was never solved. It turns chaos into design. But history's documents whisper something quieter: bureaucratic delay, overlapping jurisdictions, rivalry between city and metropolitan police, exhaustion, and class prejudice. Those, too, can hide a killer. Blank, underscore, blank. The next morning, newspapers scream double event across London. Crowds surge toward Whitechapel, blocking carriages. Vendors sell pamphlets claiming inside knowledge. The illustrated police news prints crude sketches of the killer's face, each one different. A woman faints at the sight of them. Policemen are pelted with refuse by people demanding arrests. And through it all, you can smell the rot beginning beneath the city's surface. The psychological decay that fear breeds. Inquests for both women stretch for days. At Strides, Dr. Blackwell repeats that the killer was interrupted, the blood still flowing when discovered. At Eddowes's, Dr. Brown and Dr. Sequeira debate the precision of the mutilations, whether the killer possessed anatomical knowledge. Reporters scribble, sketching diagrams of throats and organs that readers will study over breakfast. You picture the victims as they were hours before. Stride singing softly in a club. Eddowes laughing in a cell, saying she'd show them some fun once released. That line lingers like smoke. By October's first week, Whitechapel's panic curdles into resignation. Police raids yield nothing. Detectives sleep at their desks. Aberline's eyes are red. Warren's reputation falters. The killer has vanished into the same streets he walked, leaving behind only names and theories. Blank, underscore, blank. You walk one last time through Mitre Square before dawn. The stones have been scrubbed, yet in the seams between cobbles a darkness remains, as if the ground itself remembers. The lamps sputter out. The city begins its daily noise. Carriages roll past, carrying bankers to their offices, their wheels erasing the night's terror with every turn. You look up at the wall where Eddowes's blood once touched, and you see nothing. That is how the city heals, not by remembering, but by covering. 2 women dead in one night, a signature written not in letters, but in throats, and a legend that will feed for generations. You walk away before the sun rises, because the next scream is already waiting. It is Friday, the 9th of November 1888, and London is dressed in soot and drizzle. The East End feels colder than it should. You walk through Dorset Street, known by the police as the worst street in London, a row of decaying lodging houses, gin shops, and broken windows glowing faintly behind torn curtains. The rain collects in shallow ruts, carrying the city's dirt downhill. Every sound is amplified: footsteps, whispers, the clatter of boots on cobble, as if the street itself knows something terrible is about to happen. At 13 Miller's Court, a narrow cul-de-sac off Dorset Street, The door to room 13 is locked from the inside. Behind it lies the final, and the most terrible, of the Ripper's works. Mary Jane Kelly is the youngest of the canonical five. She is about 25, Irish by birth, described by friends as cheerful, fond of singing, and beautiful when sober. Some call her Marie Jeanette. Her lover, Joseph Barnett, a fish porter, had lived with her until 2 weeks before the murder. They had quarreled over her taking in other prostitutes as lodgers. Yet he still visited, bringing food, worrying about her debts. On the night of the 8th of November, witnesses see her drinking at the Britannia pub with a man described as respectable looking, wearing a felt hat and carrying a parcel. At around 2 a.m., a neighbor hears Kelly singing softly through the thin partition walls, Sweet Violet. Her voice fades into the sound of rain. Then silence. No one hears a scream. No one knocks. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The next morning, at 10:45 a.m., landlord's assistant Thomas Bowyer comes to collect rent. He taps on the door, no answer. He pushes the curtain aside from the broken window pane to look in. What he sees sends him stumbling back into the yard. Retching, you lean close beside him, peering through that same window, and for a moment you forget to breathe. On the bed lies Mary Jane Kelly, or what remains of her. The body is almost unrecognizable. Her throat has been cut down to the spine. The face is mutilated beyond human resemblance. The nose, ears, and eyelids have been cut away. Her breasts have been severed. The abdomen is emptied of organs, which are arranged around the room, some beneath her head, some placed on a bedside table. The heart is missing. The surgeon Dr. Thomas Bond, who later performs the postmortem, writes that the killer worked with frenzied skill, spending perhaps 2 hours inside that locked room. The scene smells of blood, smoke, and the faint sweetness of rotting meat. The fire grate is filled with ash and burnt fabric. The killer had burned pieces of Kelly's clothes. Perhaps for light, on the table, a small mirror leans against the wall, reflecting nothing but dark. You stand in the doorway as the investigators arrive. Inspector Aberline goes pale. Dr. Phillips and Bond take notes mechanically, their shoes sticking to the floor. Outside, the street fills with people pressing for a glimpse. The police cover the window, but the crowd does not leave. Even children stand on crates, craning to see. Dorset Street reeks of tallow smoke and gin, and every whisper carries the same word, Ripper. Blank. Underscore. Blank. At the inquest, Dr. Bond's report reads like a ledger of horror. He lists each mutilation precisely: the excision of the nose, cheeks, eyebrows, the removal of organs, the heart gone entirely. He writes that death was instantaneous from severance of the carotid arteries. The mutilations, he concludes, were post-mortem, and then, for the first time, Bond offers a psychological profile, one of the earliest in British police history. He writes that the murderer must be a man of solitary habits, subject to periodic attacks of homicidal and erotic mania, probably middle-aged, neatly attired, and likely lives among the people he kills. In the silence of the coroner's court, you can hear pens scratching. Reporters hold their breath. The words feel new: mania, solitary, erotic. Victorian England is learning to describe madness without theology. Outside, the press turns frenzy into myth. The Star prints sketches of Kelly's room with lurid imagination. The Times describes it as the most ghastly murder of the century. Londoners crowd the news stalls before dawn. Some faint, others buy extra copies. For the first time, photographers capture the scene before the body is removed, a blurred image of Kelly's remains on the bed. It is one of the earliest true crime photographs ever taken, and even now, it circulates like a curse. You imagine standing in that room when the flash powder ignites. The white burst freezes a moment that will never fade, a mattress soaked black, a wall spattered red, and the young woman's open eyes staring toward the window she once sang beside. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The investigation collapses under its own weight. There are too many witnesses. Too many false leads. Some swear they saw Kelly walking hours after her supposed death. Others insist they heard her scream, "Murder," around 4 in the morning. Dorset Street lives on rumor. Police arrest George Hutchinson, who claims to have seen Kelly with a well-dressed man near Commercial Street at 2 a.m. He describes him in uncanny detail: pale eyelashes, astrakhan coat, gold chain, a description almost too perfect. Aberline believes him at first, but the story falls apart. Hutchinson fades back into the crowd. For weeks, detectives sift through lodging houses, interviewing butchers, sailors, doctors, foreigners. They find nothing. The East End begins to breathe again. Cautiously, winter arrives, washing the blood from the cobbles. By December, the killings stop. The Ripper vanishes as suddenly as he appeared. Blank, underscore, blank. And yet, you remain here, in room 13, long after the policemen have gone. The walls sweat moisture. The air tastes of cold iron. You touch the scorched bricks above the fireplace where the killer burned light to see his work. You see faint handprints on the wall, maybe Mary's, maybe not. On the mantel lies a cracked photograph frame. No picture inside, just soot. There are whispers later that the murderer was a doctor, perhaps one with royal connections. Sir William Gull, physician to Queen Victoria, appears in these stories decades later. Others blame the painter Walter Sickert, who lived nearby and whose grim interiors seem to echo the Ripper's rooms. But in 1888, none of these names exist in police reports. They come later, fed by books and fear. The royal conspiracy grows out of silence, the way mold grows where light cannot reach. In reality, the monarchy is far away, Queen Victoria writing to her Prime Minister demanding more stringent measures. Prince Albert Victor, still at Sandringham, unaware that a legend will one day wrap him in blood he never saw. The gap between history and myth widens. You stand at its edge. Blank, underscore, blank. After Kelly's funeral on the 19th of November, the city tries to forget. Her coffin is simple pine, buried in St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery at Leytonstone. Hundreds of East Enders follow, some weeping openly. Flowers cover the grave, white roses, violets, and a wreath reading, a last tribute to one who was dearly loved. At the graveside, a priest murmurs prayers against sin and secrecy. You can smell the damp earth as it closes over the coffin. The crowd disperses slowly. A thin mist begins to fall. You remain behind, watching until the last shovel of dirt erases the shape of her name. It is here, in the quiet of the cemetery, that the case ends, not with an arrest, but with the sound of soil hitting wood. The newspapers move on. The fog lifts. London keeps breathing. And yet, the myth does not die. In taverns and drawing rooms, people still whisper about the royal cover-up, about carriages flying through fog, about surgeons and Freemasons, about a mad prince hidden away. But the files remain silent. There is no proof, only pattern, coincidence, and fear. When you walk away from the grave, you understand what few do. That Jack the Ripper's true power was not in his knife, but in the shadow he left behind, a space where imagination replaced evidence. And class, power, and terror intertwined. You look back one last time at Mary Jane Kelly's resting place. The fog thickens again, and you can almost hear her voice singing from beyond the rain-soaked streets. Sweet violet, so blue. It fades into the wind. It is the winter of 1888, and Whitechapel has learned to listen differently. The wind through the alleys sounds like footsteps. A cough in the dark is enough to make a man turn. The Ripper is gone, but his echo has taken form, a shape that everyone can imagine and no one can describe the same way twice. You stand once again on Commercial Street, weeks after Mary Jane Kelly's burial. The gas lamps hiss as though whispering secrets, and the smell of coal smoke hides everything else. Policemen walk in pairs now. Knives are confiscated from butchers, sailors, and even midwives. The pubs stay full. Because silence feels more dangerous than noise. Every corner boy knows the story. Every working girl knows the risk. The killings have stopped, yet fear lingers. An invisible fog heavier than the one rolling in from the Thames. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The police, exhausted and embarrassed, drowned in paperwork. Files pile up in drawers at Scotland Yard, bound with twine and sweat. Each folder bears a name. Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes, Kelly. 5 names that will haunt London for generations. Investigators debate whether there were more. Some add Martha Tabram, killed that August with 39 stab wounds. Perhaps the Ripper's first experiment. Others argue for later victims. Murders that resemble his hand but lack his signature. Nothing is certain anymore. Inspector Frederick Aberline, hollow-eyed and chain-smoking, insists the killer is local. A man who could blend into the narrow geography of Whitechapel. His memoranda are careful, clinical, without sensational language. Across the river, Sir Charles Warren has resigned under public pressure, accused of incompetence and arrogance. His decision to erase the Golston Street graffiti becomes the symbol of failure, to some. Even of conspiracy. The case now has no captain, only clerks and ghosts. Each officer writes his own theory, a deranged doctor, a slaughterhouse worker, a foreign sailor, a lunatic escaped from Colney Hatch Asylum. Every name drips with class prejudice, foreign, poor, Jewish, mad. The East End becomes the canvas for middle-class terror, its residents reduced to silhouettes of crime and disease. You can taste that prejudice in every article you read. It tastes like ash. Blank. Underscore. Blank. While the Yard struggles, the press prospers. The story of Jack the Ripper has become its own industry. Pamphlets, penny dreadfuls, and handbills are printed faster than facts. The Illustrated Police News turns murder into woodcut theater, women running from shadows, knives gleaming, top hats and fog. The name, Jack, born from the "Dear Boss" letter, becomes the hook that sells thousands of copies each morning. You imagine the printers setting the type in ink that still smells of iron. The plates rattling as they roll. The murder scenes are transformed into entertainment. The East End into a stage. It is the birth of modern true crime. And you, the witness, are already part of its audience. For the first time, the nation consumes death collectively. Workers discuss the wounds between shifts. Ladies at drawing room teas whisper about mutilations as if they were exotic art. Every mention of the Ripper feeds both fascination and fear. He becomes the first celebrity killer, the first villain whose anonymity is the engine of his legend. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Amid this hysteria, the royal conspiracy theory begins to sprout roots. It starts quietly, in private clubs and fringe newspapers. Some recall that the commissioner, Warren, was a Freemason, and that the police's failure must hide something. Then comes the tale, a scandal, whispered in the back rooms of Fleet Street, that the Duke of Clarence had secretly married a Catholic shopgirl, and that the prostitutes were murdered to protect the monarchy from disgrace. But the story is wrong in every measurable way. The Duke was far from London during the murders. His physician's schedules are public. The alleged wife, Annie Crook, is a name lifted from gossip. Yet the theory is too perfect to die. When the facts fail to produce a killer, imagination crowns one. Years later, this tale will be given bones and blood by writers like Stephen Knight, claiming a network of royal doctors and Masonic avengers. They will say that Sir William Gull, the Queen's physician, struck the women down as punishment for blackmail, that artist Walter Sickert served as lookout, that the police protected them all. It is an elegant lie, wrapped in the language of revelation. You can trace its power. It flatters the reader into feeling initiated, privy to secrets hidden by history. It gives order to chaos and morality to madness. To believe in conspiracy is to feel safer than believing in randomness. But the records, the cold ink and faded signatures, do not bend. There is no carriage racing through fog, no royal surgeon with a scalpel, no cover-up. only the limits of human policing in a city bursting beyond control. And yet, that myth will outlive all who knew the truth, because people prefer mystery to disappointment. Blank. Underscore. Blank. By 1890, Whitechapel begins to heal, though scars remain. The prostitutes still work, but fewer stay out past midnight. Lodging housekeepers still rent beds by the hour, but they keep candles lit through the night. The Ripper letters keep arriving long after the killer's knife has gone silent, hundreds of them. In red ink, each one more desperate to be believed. Police clerks open them, sigh, and file them away. New suspects appear like seasons. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-Jewish barber confined to an asylum in 1891, who mutters about voices and refuses to eat food unless prepared by his sister. Montague John Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher found drowned in the Thames that same year. His suicide note vague and haunted. Thomas Cutbush, a young clerk who stabbed women in the buttocks in 1891. Sensationalized by the Sun newspaper as the real Ripper. Each name burns for a moment, then fades, replaced by another. You picture Scotland Yard as a maze of desks and disappointment. The gaslights flickering over faces too tired to hope. Files close not because of resolution, but fatigue. The Ripper becomes less a man than a word, shorthand for failure. Blank. Underscore. Blank. In the decades that follow, the murders become history, yet every few years, the story returns, dressed in new certainty. Early in the 20th century, retired officers publish memoirs insisting they knew the killer. In the 1930s, film studios resurrect him in shadowy melodramas. By the 1970s, conspiracy books turn him into an emblem of class war. And in the 21st century, DNA tests on a shawl, claimed to be Catherine Eddowes's, are announced with fanfare, only to be questioned for contamination and lack of provenance. The legend mutates, but it never dies, because Jack the Ripper is no longer a person. He is a mirror. In every generation, society sees its own fears reflected in him. Fear of the foreigner, of poverty, of the powerful, of the mad. His facelessness is his immortality. You walk through Whitechapel today, the modern streets lined with cafes and markets, and the ghosts still cling to brick corners. Tour guides point to murder sites with umbrellas, and visitors follow, phones raised, as if chasing a phantom for photographs. Somewhere between curiosity and voyeurism, remembrance blurs. Blank. Underscore. Blank. But what of those who died? Their graves are scattered across London. Mary Ann Nichols rests at City of London Cemetery, her headstone inscribed simply with her name and date. Annie Chapman lies in Manor Park Cemetery under earth without a marker. Elizabeth Stride in East London Cemetery. Catherine Eddowes in City Cemetery. Mary Jane Kelly in St. Patrick's. Leytonstone. Each woman reduced to coordinates. Each deserving more than memory turned into tourism. You stand at Eddowes's grave on a cold morning. Frost silvering the grass. Someone has left fresh flowers, lilies and violets. A laminated note reads, "You are not forgotten." The handwriting is modern, careful. It is proof that even after more than a century, people still feel the need to apologize for a world that failed them. The wind moves softly through the cemetery trees, sounding almost like the rustle of skirts. You close your eyes and hear the footsteps again, the same rhythm that once echoed down Bucks Row. Hanbury Street, Burner Street, Mitre Square, and Dorset Street. They never stopped. Not really. They just changed shoes. Blank. Underscore. Blank. When you walk away, you carry with you the only truth that endures. Jack the Ripper was never one man. He was the collision of poverty, neglect, and fear, a city's illness made flesh, and the conspiracy, royal or otherwise, as only the shape that people gave to their helplessness. In every era, someone must be blamed. In 1888, it was the foreigner and the poor. In later decades, it was the powerful and the secretive. But the real culprit has always been the same: indifference. You turn a final corner into modern Whitechapel. Neon lights replace gas lamps. Traffic hum replaces horse hooves. The air still carries the faint metallic tang of rain on iron. Somewhere behind you, a church bell rings, marking an hour that no longer matters. And as the sound fades, you remember what you were told at the beginning. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness to how horror becomes history, and how history becomes myth. You stand in the reading room of the British Library. The smell of paper and dust like old breath. The year is irrelevant. Time folds easily here. Before you lies a table stacked with yellowed newspapers, coroner's transcripts, and the curious weight of myth. The lamps hum faintly above. Every story you're about to hear claims to tell the truth, yet each contradicts the next. You are here not as a believer, but as a witness, tracing the way rumor hardens into legend. The Ripper killings have ended, but not the hunger for meaning. A killer without a face is intolerable. In the vacuum left by Scotland Yard's failure, whispers began to rise, not from Whitechapel's alleys, but from gentlemen's clubs and drawing rooms. If the police could not catch a poor man, then perhaps they were protecting a rich one. Thus was born one of history's most enduring urban myths, that the Ripper murders were a royal cover-up. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The story takes shape decades after the crimes, stitched together from gossip, coincidences, and the public's resentment of privilege. Its central figure, Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, grandson of Queen Victoria, second in line to the throne. Born in 1864, the Duke, known to the family as Eddie, was delicate, quiet, and academically unimpressive. He was rumored to be naive, impressionable, perhaps even simple. In 1888, while the Ripper's knife carved through Whitechapel, Albert Victor was indeed in his mid-20s, old enough, at least in theory, to have lived a double life. The first whisper comes from a story printed in the early 1970s. But its seeds were older, that the Duke had secretly married a Catholic shopgirl named Annie Elizabeth Crook. Against the laws of the royal family, they supposedly had a daughter, Alice, hidden away. When a group of Whitechapel prostitutes learned of the secret marriage, they allegedly tried to blackmail the crown, and were slaughtered by royal agents to silence them. It is an irresistible tale: sin, sex, and scandal in the shadow of Buckingham Palace. You can see why it spread, yet every thread unravels under examination. Blank. Underscore. Blank. You open the court circular for the autumn of 1888. It lists the Duke's engagements with dutiful precision: Balmoral, Sandringham, official dinners, hunts, receptions. There is not a single unaccounted day during the main sequence of murders. Even his letters home survive, mundane, well-timed, dull. The idea that he vanished from royal duties to stalk the alleys of Whitechapel collapses against the ink of his own schedule. Still, conspiracy never needs proof, only pattern. So the theory mutates. The Duke himself, people begin to say, was not the killer but the cause of the killings. His secret marriage threatened the monarchy. The government, the Freemasons, the Queen's physician, all joined hands to erase the evidence. Here enters Sir William Withy Gull, physician in ordinary to Queen Victoria. Gull was a real man, a respected doctor who, in 1887, had suffered a debilitating stroke. Yet in the conspiracy's imagination, he becomes something else, a surgical assassin, using his anatomical knowledge to punish the prostitutes. In Stephen Knight's 1976 book, Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, Gull's frail figure is transformed into the mastermind of a Masonic vendetta. Accompanied by a coachman named John Netley, he is said to have murdered the women according to a Masonic ritual of silence and secrecy. Artist Walter Sickert, a real painter fascinated by the Ripper case, is inserted into the tale as a reluctant accomplice who later leaves clues in his canvases. Knight's version reads like revelation. For many readers, it felt truer than the police reports. It gave moral shape to chaos, the powerless slain by the powerful, the poor crushed by empire. Yet historians quickly dismantled it. The supposed Catholic marriage was undocumented. Annie Crook never existed outside rumor. Gull was partially paralyzed. Netley's name appeared nowhere in any records. Sickert was in France during several murders. Still, the story endured, because it satisfied a deeper longing, the wish that evil, at least, might be organized. Blank. Underscore. Blank. You picture the myth spreading through the 1970s and 1980s like a contagion of fascination. Documentaries show actors in fog-soaked alleys, horse-drawn carriages vanishing into mist, the surgeon's scalpel gleaming under candlelight. The Duke's portrait, once mild, is repainted as sinister. Freemason symbols are drawn over maps of Whitechapel. The narrative is too cinematic to die. But if you peel away the theatrics, what remains is a map of fear and class. Victorian London was obsessed with secrecy, sexual, moral, institutional. Homosexuality was criminal, the monarchy was sacred, and the poor were invisible. The Ripper murders forced those worlds to collide. The royal conspiracy theory, in its heart, is less about evidence than about anxiety, that the powerful can murder without consequence. And that truth itself can be buried beneath protocol. It is the paranoia of empire turned inward. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The Freemason thread, too, has a factual root, though a small one. Many high-ranking officials in the Metropolitan Police were indeed Masons, including Sir Charles Warren. Freemasonry valued loyalty and secrecy, which to outsiders could look like collusion. When Warren ordered the Golston Street graffiti erased before it could be photographed, his decision, likely driven by fear of riots, became proof to conspiracists of a ritual cover-up. The Jawess, the misspelled word in the chalk message, was reinterpreted as an esoteric Masonic reference to 3 assassins from Solomon's Temple legend. In truth, it was probably just the misspelling of a drunk hand or a policeman's hasty transcription. Yet symbols are powerful when reason falters. In dim light, chalk on a wall can look like scripture. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Another variation emerges, that Sir Robert Anderson, Assistant Commissioner of the CID, and Chief Inspector Donald Swanson knew the killer's identity and hid it to protect Britain's image. In 1910, Anderson writes in his memoir that the murderer was a low-class Polish Jew confined to an asylum. Swanson later scribbles a marginal note identifying the man as Kosminski, confirming no royal link at all. Still, readers ignore the names. They prefer palaces to poverty. By the late 20th century, the royal theory has fused with folklore. It enters novels, films, even opera. In 1988, the film Jack the Ripper, starring Michael Caine, revives Knight's version. Gull as the Queen's executioner, Albert Victor as naive scapegoat. In 2001, Alan Moore's graphic novel From Hell expands it further, a fever dream of architecture, mysticism, and empire collapsing into madness. None of it is real, yet each layer of fiction feels truer than the bureaucratic truth that the Ripper was never caught because London's poor were never valued. You look down again at the official records, dull, precise, compassionate in their own way. The handwriting of the surgeons, the sworn testimony of widows, the pathologist's neat sketches of wounds. None mention princes or palaces, only fog, fear, and flesh. Blank. Underscore. Blank. And yet, even knowing this, part of you understands why the conspiracy thrives. It tells a moral story in a world without morality. It makes sense of randomness by giving it an author. It transforms the Ripper from a brute into a metaphor, corruption cloaked in velvet. In that sense, the royal theory is not about who killed those women, it's about what killed them. Class division, secrecy, hypocrisy, power. Every era rediscovers its own version. Some imagine the killer as an aristocrat, others, a Freemason. Some now point to new DNA tests said to identify a Polish immigrant, while others reject them as tampered. The argument is endless because it isn't really about evidence. It's about identity, about how societies define evil when they cannot accept their own reflection. The truth is smaller, sadder. The Ripper may have been no more than a laborer, a barber, or a deranged loner, but such an answer feels insufficient, too human. So people keep searching for kings and surgeons, not ghosts of hunger. Blank. Underscore. Blank. You leave the library near closing. The sky above London is the same gray it was in 1888. On the walk toward Whitehall, you pass the silhouettes of statues, monarchs in bronze. Unblinking, you think of how rumor climbs monuments faster than ivy. Somewhere in the distance, Big Ben tolls the hour, solemn as a verdict that never comes. In your pocket, the pages of the conspiracy book rustle against the police reports, fiction and fact sharing the same space. You realize that history is rarely written by what happened, it's written by what people believe happened. And belief, once it hardens, is harder to kill than any man. At the gates of Buckingham Palace, tourists snap photographs through iron bars. None of them think of Whitechapel. None smell the blood, but under the roar of the city, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the faint scratch of pen on paper, someone, somewhere, still writing a new theory. Because in the story of Jack the Ripper, paranoia is a crown that never tarnishes. You return to Whitechapel more than a century later, though the streets have changed their names and their faces. The narrow courts are gone, replaced by cafes, hostels, and kebab shops. Tour guides gather groups of visitors beneath street lamps, holding laminated photos of mutilated victims as they point to places that no longer exist. The crowd laughs nervously, phones raised, the same cobblestones once slick with blood now polished for tourism. You walk among them quietly, unseen. The smell is different now, coffee, diesel, rain, but the air holds a residue, like something still unsettled. The wind hums between buildings, carrying faint echoes of boots on stone. You remember the phrase you were told in the beginning. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness. And here, amid neon and history, you witness what the killer truly left behind. Not only 5 bodies, but an idea that has outlived every name, every theory, every truth. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Jack the Ripper was never captured, yet he was never forgotten. His shadow stretches through centuries, feeding newspapers, novels, and nightmares. He was the first murderer of the modern media age, born at the intersection of crime and technology. In 1888, telegraphs carried news of his killings within hours across the world, from London to New York, from Sydney to Bombay. By the time the 5th body was found, the Ripper was already a global name. That name would never die. Within a year, he was in penny dreadfuls and stage melodramas. Within a decade, he haunted the early cinema. When the 20th century learned to film horror, it chose his fog. When it learned to write crime fiction, it borrowed his blade. You can trace his fingerprints through every serial killer myth that followed, from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde to Psycho. From the Silence of the Lambs to the nightly news, each new monster carries a piece of his anonymity, that cold absence of motive which fascinates and terrifies alike. He was, in a sense, the prototype, not of murder, but of narrative. Blank. Underscore. Blank. But history's echo is not only cultural, it is political. The Ripper murders forced Victorian England to look at what it had long ignored: poverty, prostitution, inequality. The East End was an exposed wound, and the case peeled away its bandage. For a brief, reluctant moment, newspapers that had mocked the working class now printed their names. Parliament debated sanitation, housing, women's welfare. Journalists like W.T. Stead began campaigns for social reform, describing Whitechapel as a hell on earth within the empire. You walk through those same streets today, past modern towers rising where slums once stood, and wonder whether the city learned or merely paved over its shame. The poverty is less visible, but not gone. Shadows still gather in doorways. Desperation, like fog, finds new corners. And so the Ripper lingers, not as a man, but as a reminder of how indifference kills more surely than knives. Blank. underscore, blank. Inside museums and archives, his artifacts sit under glass. The police files, once secret, are catalogued by scholars. You can see the actual handwriting of Inspector Aberline, the penciled diagrams of wounds, the faint brown stains that history politely refuses to describe. They are not relics of glory, but of failure, paper monuments to an investigation that could not deliver justice. There's something profoundly human about that failure. It reminds you that history is written not by certainty but by effort, by men walking foggy streets with lanterns, by women whose voices were taken but whose names remain. Somewhere in the quiet of the reading room, a curator whispers the roll call again. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. 5 names, 5 stories cut short. Everything else, every letter, theory, and film, revolves around them like dust around a dying star. Blank, underscore, blank. But the Ripper's afterlife is also a mirror to the age of obsession that followed. In the 20th and 21st centuries, technology turned murder into entertainment. His crimes became templates for podcasts, documentaries, reenactments, endless Ripper walks. You watch a group of tourists standing outside the 10 Bells pub, drinking pints where victims once stood. They laugh, take selfies, pose under fog machines arranged for atmosphere. The guide, wearing a top hat, calls out, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is where the killer may have watched his final victim. The irony is thick enough to taste. In a way, the Ripper has won, not as a man, but as a story that cannot die. His facelessness has made him immortal. You feel a quiet nausea as you walk away. The real women are gone, but their suffering has been rewritten into theater. The same society that ignored their hunger in life now sells tickets for their deaths. This, too, is part of the legacy. Blank, underscore, blank. The science has improved, the mystery hasn't. Over a century after the murders, new analyses still surface. Mitochondrial DNA from bloodstains on a shawl said to belong to Catherine Eddowes, matched to descendants of a suspect named Aaron Kosminski. The announcement, made in 2019 by researchers from Liverpool John Moores University, caused headlines around the world, but other geneticists quickly noted the sample contamination, the uncertain provenance of the shawl itself. The debate flared, then faded. The Ripper remains unsolved, perhaps unsolvable. And maybe that's why he endures. Certainty would kill the legend. Doubt keeps it alive. In the dark, you imagine him not as a man, but as a shape shifting through time, sometimes a royal surgeon, sometimes a butcher, sometimes an asylum inmate, sometimes a metaphor for empire. The face changes, the hunger remains. Blank, underscore, blank. The royal conspiracy, though disproven by historians, still fascinates. It survives because it speaks to something deeper than monarchy, to the human belief that evil must come from power. To accept that evil could come from ordinary poverty, from a man in the next room, is harder. So the myth climbs upward to palaces, doctors, Freemasons, because that's where imagination feels safe placing its fear. But history whispers otherwise. Evil, it says, is mundane. It walks quietly, unnoticed. It drinks gin from the same cups as the rest of us. You recall the words of Dr. Thomas Bond, written days after examining Mary Jane Kelly's remains. The object of the murderer appears to have been mutilation and disfigurement, not possession. Bond could not name him, but he understood something essential, that the Ripper sought not to live forever, but to erase, to unmake. Yet in that attempt, he created the opposite, a memory that refuses to die. Blank, underscore, blank. As the night thickens, you wander toward Mitre Square again. The modern buildings hum with electricity. Security lights burn white where lanterns once glowed amber. You stop at a small bronze plaque set into the wall, a quiet memorial for Catherine Eddowes. The inscription reads simply, "In memory of a woman who suffered here." and whose death led to compassion. It's a small truth, tucked between glass and concrete. Her name, once buried under 1,000 newspaper caricatures, is given back its dignity. You linger there, letting the hum of traffic fade until the sound becomes the breathing of the past. Somewhere behind you, a church bell tolls, not for fear, but for remembrance. Blank, underscore, blank. When you close your eyes, you see not the killer, but the lantern light glinting on cobblestones, not the wounds, but the hands of policemen lifting a blanket, not the myth, but the small human grief that started it all. The Ripper's greatest illusion was convincing the world that the story was about him. It never was. It was always about the women. And perhaps that is the real legacy, that their deaths, horrible as they were, forced the empire to look at its own reflection, its poverty, its hypocrisy, its need for control. Every retelling, every investigation, every debate keeps them alive in some fractured way. In the end, the fog clears, London breathes, the sound of footsteps fades into the pulse of the city that will never truly sleep. You walk away, passing from myth back into the modern night, carrying only what matters: their names, their silence, and the echo of history whispering. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness to how the living remember the dead.